You won't believe what just unfolded in Parliament. Something so explosive, so utterly unprecedented that it sent shockwaves through every corner of the United Kingdom. Karma, the sitting Prime Minister, has just been thrown out of the House of Commons. Yes, removed by security live on national television after a brutal verbal confrontation with Nigel Farage that spiraled completely out of control. This wasn't just a fiery exchange of words. It was a full-blown political collapse. A public breakdown that revealed a prime minister cracking under the pressure of rising opposition, failing immigration policies, and a nation that's quickly losing faith. If you thought British politics had already hit rock bottom, think again. Because what happened today might just change the course of the Starr government forever. It all began during what was meant to be a standard prime minister's question session. The atmosphere was tense, but no one expected it to explode the way it did. Nigel Farage stood up, calm and composed, and began delivering a scathing but calculated takedown of the government's handling of illegal immigration. He pointed to record numbers of channel crossings, leaked EU negotiations, and mounting evidence that Labour had no serious plan to protect Britain's borders. His voice never rose, but every sentence landed like a hammer. It was political criticism in its purest form, sharp, specific, and rooted in public concern. But then the temperature in the chamber shifted. Starmer, clearly agitated, began shaking, his head even before Farage finished. And then, in a move that stunned MPs from all parties, he interrupted the proceedings with a fiery and personal attack. Starmer didn't just challenge Farage's arguments. He launched into an unhinged tirade, accusing the Reform UK leader of stoking division, spreading hatred, and even questioning his right to speak in the chamber. His words were laced with venom. This was no longer about immigration policy. This was personal, angry, and entirely off script. The room erupted. Audible gasps echoed across the benches. Even veteran Labour MPs looked alarmed. Conservatives jeered. Reform members rose to their feet. The Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay High, immediately called for order. But Starmer ignored. He kept shouting. He gestured wildly across the aisle, his voice rising above the protests, his tone sharp and aggressive. It was a shocking display, one that many watching had never seen from a sitting prime minister, and the speaker had had enough. In a moment that will now go down in parliamentary history, Speaker High invoked Standing Order 43, the rule that allows for the removal of a member of parliament who refuses to maintain decorum and order. The chamber went silent. This rule is so rarely used that most citizens have never even heard of it. But today, it was enforced against the leader of the government. Security personnel, already positioned nearby due to the escalating chaos, were signaled to approach. The Prime Minister, still visibly angry, was told he had to leave the chamber. At first, Starmer refused. He stood his ground, attempting to justify his outburst, but High remained firm. "This House will not tolerate personal attacks in place of debate," he declared. "You have breached the rules and must vacate the floor." In that instant, the balance of power in the chamber shifted under the eyes of shocked MPs, cameras, and a stunned nation. Karma, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, was escorted out of Parliament. Not since the days of historic political crisis has the chamber seen such a moment. This was not a resignation, not a protest walkout, but a forced ejection from the heart of British democracy. The message was loud and clear. No one, not even the Prime Minister, is above the rules. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage stood silently, watching it all unfold. He didn't gloat, he didn't interrupt, and when he finally did speak, it was with sharp control. This is what happens when politicians can't defend their failures. They lash out, they break down, but the people of Britain deserve leadership, not tantrums. His words, concise and composed, drew quiet nods even from MPs who typically oppose him. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been clearer. As the footage replayed across every major news channel, the public reaction was swift and furious. Hashtags like PM thrown out, None where Commons melt, and Iner Sarma unfit began trending within minutes. Social media exploded with clips, commentary, and disbelief. It wasn't just political junkies tuning in. Everyday Brits, working-class families, students, pensioners, everyone was talking about the Prime Minister's meltdown in coffee shops, on buses, in offices across the country. The question was the same. What just happened to Karma? And perhaps more importantly, how did we get here? Because this moment, as shocking as it was, didn't come from nowhere. It's the product of weeks, no months, of mounting political pressure. A government under fire for soaring illegal migration, a prime minister accused of secretive deals with Brussels, a party that promised change but is delivering confusion. This was not an isolated outburst. It was the eruption of a volcano that's been rumbling beneath the surface of British politics for far too long. The aftermath of Keir Starmer's unprecedented ejection from Parliament wasn't just a spectacle. It was a political earthquake whose tremors reached far beyond Westminster. Almost immediately, media outlets across the spectrum scrambled to make sense of what had occurred. Within an hour, headlines were screaming across the internet and television screens. Prime Minister removed from Commons, star Farage showdown, and leadership in crisis. Political commentators, analysts, and insiders flooded the airwaves, each one stunned by what they had witnessed. Many could not recall a moment in modern British history where a sitting prime minister had been physically removed from the chamber by order of the speaker. It wasn't just historic, it was humiliating. And as the political fallout began to unfold, so too did the deeper consequences. The Labour Party, already divided over Starmer's strategy on immigration and his handling of the EU relationship, was now facing a full-blown leadership crisis. Backbench MPs were reportedly livid, not just with the Prime Minister's conduct, but with the political damage it had caused. Several senior figures within Labour were said to be in emergency meetings, within hours of the incident, discussing how to manage the PR disaster. Whispers of internal revolt grew louder, with anonymous sources claiming that party elders were exploring contingency plans in case Starmer's grip on power further deteriorated. Across the aisle, the reaction was swift and cutting. Conservative leaders capitalized on the chaos, calling Starmer's meltdown proof that he is unfit to lead a nation under pressure. They pointed to the emotional outburst as evidence that the Prime Minister lacked the temperament and discipline required of his office. Reform UK, meanwhile, seized the moment with precision. Nigel Farage's team began circulating the now viral footage of Star's outburst paired with Farage's calm response. The contrast was devastating. In a single afternoon, Reform had gained what political parties spend years building: public credibility backed by a powerful visual moment. And the public, they were watching closely. According to flash polls conducted just hours after the incident, Starmer's approval rating had dropped by double digits. For a leader already struggling to unite a fragmented electorate, this was catastrophic. Focus groups described the Prime Minister as unstable, angry, and out of touch. In working-class communities that once leaned Labour, the tone had shifted from disappointment to disbelief. He couldn't even keep his cool in Parliament. How can he run the country? One voter asked during a televised Vox Pop. The sense of betrayal was palpable. But beyond the political theater and media frenzy, the deeper story was even more alarming. The system itself appeared to be breaking down. Parliament, long regarded as a place of reasoned debate and civil discourse, had become a battlefield of personal vendettas and emotional explosions. Star's actions weren't just a lapse in judgment, they were symbolic of a broader institutional decay. The Prime Minister had allowed personal rage to override democratic norms, and in doing so, he had dealt a blow not only to his office, but to public trust in the very machinery of government. This trust had already been eroding for months. The immigration crisis had spiraled out of control, with thousands of illegal crossings occurring under Labour's watch. Promised deportation flights were delayed or quietly cancelled. The hotel bill for asylum seekers was ballooning into the billions. And then came the revelations of secret discussions with EU officials, backdoor conversations that raised the specter of Britain realigning with Brussels without public consent. These stories were already painting a portrait of a government overwhelmed and unprepared. The Commons meltdown only added fuel to the fire. Nigel Farage, on the other hand, emerged from the chaos as a towering figure of restraint and resolve. In the hours following the incident, he held a press conference outside Parliament. Calmly, he addressed the press and the nation. What we saw today was not strength. It was weakness disguised as anger. The Prime Minister had an opportunity to defend his policies. Instead, he attacked his critics. That's not leadership. That's collapse. His remarks, delivered with poise and clarity, resonated deeply with voters who had grown tired of political doublespeak and emotional instability. Farage's statement was quickly clipped and circulated across social media, drawing millions of views. Supporters hailed him as the voice of reason. Even those previously skeptical of Reform UK admitted that Farage had handled the moment with dignity. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. While Starmer lost control, Farage gained momentum. The response from international observers was no less severe. Foreign media outlets from across Europe and beyond covered the story extensively, often framing it as a cautionary tale of political fragility. French and German broadcasters questioned whether Britain was entering a period of governmental collapse. American networks ran segments titled "British PM Ejected" during live debate, with political experts speculating on how long Starmer could survive in office. The international community, once used to viewing British politics as stable, was now witnessing the kind of chaos typically associated with governments in disarray. Within Labour, the damage control operation was in full swing. Spokespersons were deployed across networks to frame the Prime Minister's actions as a response to provocation. But it wasn't landing. Viewers had seen the footage. They had heard the shouts. The visual of a red-faced shouting Prime Minister being escorted out of Parliament was already burned into the national consciousness. No amount of spin could undo the moment. And it wasn't. Just a public relations disaster. It was a constitutional one. Legal scholars began debating whether Starr had violated codes of conduct serious enough to warrant formal disciplinary action. Some even floated the possibility of a no-confidence motion being tabled in the coming weeks. The idea, once unthinkable, was now openly discussed. For a prime minister who had only recently assumed power, this was nothing short of political free-all. Meanwhile, Reform UK began surging in real-time polling. Voters who had previously seen Farage as a protest figure were now beginning to view him as a potential statesman. His calls for restoring order, upholding parliamentary standards, and delivering real solutions to immigration were echoing across constituencies. Reform was no longer a fringe party, it was becoming a serious contender. And yet, amid all this chaos, Karma remained silent. After being escorted out, he reportedly left Parliament through a back entrance, avoiding reporters. No official statement, no press conference, no apology, just silence. It was a silence that spoke volumes. And the nation, still reeling from the spectacle, was left to wonder, has Britain just witnessed the moment a prime minister lost control not only of Parliament, but of power itself? As the dust settled and the cameras dimmed, the deeper cracks within the Labour Party began to surface in ways that could no longer be ignored. What started as murmurs in the corridors of Westminster turned into full-blown panic behind closed doors. Senior figures within the party, including cabinet ministers and influential backbenches, reportedly clashed in urgent meetings as they tried to come to terms with the fallout from Starr's disgraceful exit. Some demanded damage control through public apologies and internal disciplinary reviews, while others went further, arguing that the Prime Minister's conduct had permanently compromised Labour's credibility. Internal communications revealed a party at war with itself, fractured, furious, and fumbling for a response. Meanwhile, calls for accountability grew louder from both inside and outside Parliament. Several opposition MPs tabled questions for an emergency session, demanding clarity on whether the Prime Minister's behavior constituted a breach of the ministerial code. Prominent voices in the legal community began weighing in, warning that the Speaker's unprecedented decision to invoke Standing Order 43 against a Prime Minister could trigger a constitutional test not seen in modern history. Was Starmer merely censured for a moment of emotional excess, or had he crossed a line that made his continued premiership untenable? These were no longer hypothetical debates. They were being asked in real time on every news channel and debated by every political commentator across the country. The media's role in shaping the fallout was relentless. Footage of Starr's outburst and the moment of his removal was played repeatedly across the BBC, Sky News, GB News, and international outlets. The angle, the audio, the reaction shots, they became etched in the public memory. Newspapers ran damning front pages the following morning. The Daily Mail called it the day leadership died. The Times labeled it a crisis of command, while The Guardian, traditionally sympathetic to Labour, could not defend the Prime Minister's conduct and instead highlighted the party's internal divisions. Even The Independent, often seen as a centrist publication, declared in bold type, "PM ejected, Parliament breaks." The social media response only intensified the pressure. Millions of views, likes, shares, and comments poured in. Hashtags like Hack Karma Meltdown PM thrown out and Nash Farage standing tall dominated trending lists for 2 straight days. Influencers, commentators, and even political public figures weighed in. Popular YouTubers, podcasters, and TikTokers dissected the moment, turning it into both a symbol of political decay and a viral sensation. The nation wasn't just watching, it was reacting, debating, and judging. In working-class towns across the Midlands and the North, Labour's once solid strongholds, the reaction was brutal. Local radio stations and call-in shows were inundated with voices of frustration. Voters said they felt betrayed, humiliated, and abandoned. Some lifelong Labour supporters admitted they were reconsidering their political loyalty for the first time in decades. One caller from Doncaster summed up the sentiment perfectly. "I voted for stability, not for this circus. If Starmer can't hold himself together in the Commons, how is he going to negotiate with the EU, the US, or China?" Nigel Farage, meanwhile, moved quickly to solidify his advantage. Reform UK held campaign-style events across several regions, capitalizing on the wave of attention. Farage framed the incident not as a personal victory, but as a national awakening. He declared that the events in Parliament had exposed a ruling class that had lost touch with the people, one that responded to criticism, not with answers, but with fury. His message was simple, direct, and dangerous for Labour. The system is broken. The leadership has failed. It's time to take our country back. Supporters of Reform UK rallied behind the message. Membership numbers reportedly surged. Donations poured in. More crucially, undecided voters began paying closer attention. The perception of Farage as merely a provocateur was rapidly shifting. He was now being seen by many as a credible alternative to a collapsing establishment. And it wasn't just traditional right-wing voters. Disaffected centrists and even some Labour moderates began engaging with Reform's platform, curious to see whether the party could turn the moment into momentum. Back in Westminster, pressure mounted on Labour to respond decisively. But with Starmer refusing to speak publicly and the party leadership struggling to maintain a unified message, confusion reigned. Multiple versions of internal events began leaking, some claiming Starmer had attempted to apologize privately to the Speaker, others suggesting he felt no remorse and intended to stand firm. The contradictions only made matters worse. The public wanted answers, and the silence from number 10 only amplified the noise. Rumors of potential leadership challenges began to surface. Some within Labour's parliamentary ranks quietly reached out to potential successors. Figures like Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, and Ayat Cooper were suddenly being mentioned in the corridors of power, not just as ministers, but as alternatives. Though no official moves were made, the shadow of rebellion had been cast. Starmer's. Hold on. Leadership had never looked weaker. Constitutional scholars also began raising concerns about the implications of the Prime Minister's ejection. Some questioned whether the Speaker's authority had now expanded beyond precedent. Others warned that if Starmer refused to address the situation publicly, he risked creating a constitutional vacuum. Could a Prime Minister, who had been formally removed from the Commons floor, continue to govern without a public reckoning? Could Parliament function normally under such strained conditions? These questions, once theoretical, were now being asked in urgent tones across news panels and legal briefings, and through it all, the public continued to watch and wait. The incident had touched something deep within the national consciousness, a growing fatigue with leaders who appeared detached, defensive, and dishonorable. Starmer's eruption was more than a scandal. It was a breaking point for many. It encapsulated the growing belief that the current political class, regardless of party, had lost its grip on reality and responsibility. For now, the country waits. Will the Prime Minister emerge? The question loomed over Westminster like a dark cloud. Hours turned into days, and still there was no word from number 10. The silence became deafening. In the absence of leadership, speculation filled the void. Journalists camped outside Downing Street, their cameras fixed on the famous Black Door, waiting for a glimpse of movement. Political commentators debated endlessly on late-night panels, each asking the same question. Was this the end for karma? Inside Labour headquarters, the mood was described as chaotic by insiders. Staffers leaked accounts of frantic meetings, clashing strategies, and a sense of impending collapse. Some argued that the Prime Minister needed to face the public immediately, issue a sincere apology, and attempt to reset the narrative. Others believed the damage was irreversible and that prolonging his silence only made matters worse. One senior aide reportedly said, "Every hour he hides, reform grows stronger." The opposition sensed blood in the water. Conservative leaders escalated their attacks, branding Starmer a liability to Britain. They accused him of losing the trust of Parliament, the people, and even his own party. Reform UK, emboldened by surging polls, began calling for a general election, framing the chaos as proof that Labour had lost its mandate to govern. Nigel Farage, at the center of it all, kept his message disciplined, calm, steady, and relentlessly focused on leadership. International pressure also began mounting. Allies in Washington and Brussels privately expressed concern about the instability gripping Britain. Reports surfaced that foreign diplomats were quietly reaching out to senior Labour figures other than Starmer, unsure whether the Prime Minister could remain in power long enough to deliver on his commitments. The perception of weakness was spreading beyond the UK's borders, raising questions about Britain's credibility on the global stage. Finally, after nearly a week of silence, the Prime Minister appeared. Cameras captured him stepping out of number 10, his expression grave. He walked to the podium facing a sea of reporters. The nation held its breath. Would he apologize? Would he resign? Or would he attempt to fight on? What came next would define not just his leadership, but his legacy. Last week, Starmer began, his voice strained but steady. "I let my emotions override. My duty as Prime Minister. For that, I want to apologize to Parliament, to my colleagues, and most importantly to the people of this country. Britain deserves leadership rooted in calm and reason, not anger. I failed in that moment. It was a rare moment of contrition, but one that felt too little, too late." The apology, though carefully worded, did not erase the image of his meltdown or the humiliation of being escorted from Parliament. Reporters pressed him with questions about whether he would resign, but Starmer avoided direct answers, insisting instead that he remained committed to delivering on his government's promises. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Commentators described the statement as damage control, not leadership. Within hours, new polling showed that trust in Starr had collapsed to historic lows. Labour voters were deserting in droves, many shifting directly to Reform UK. What was once unthinkable now seemed inevitable.